In March 2013, police in Cambridgeshire began investigating what initially appeared to be a routine missing person case. Within days, however, the situation would escalate into something far more disturbing. A sequence of killings carried out over a short period of time, involving victims who had little connection to one another. At the centre of the case was Joanna Dennehy, a woman in her early 30s living in the Peterborough area. Those who knew her during the years leading up to the crimes described a chaotic lifestyle marked by heavy drinking, unstable relationships, and a frequent conflict with people around her. She moved frequently, struggled to maintain steady employment, and often associated with individuals connected to petty crime and substance misuse. Despite occasional periods where she appeared capable of maintaining ordinary routines, acquaintances later told investigators that her behaviour could shift quickly, sometimes becoming aggressive without clear provocation. In the months before the killings, Dennehy had been staying intermittently with acquaintances in Peterborough, spending much of her time socialising in local pubs and forming new connections within nightlife circles. Many of these relationships were brief, unstable, and often centred around drinking. One of the people she became acquainted with during this period was Kevin Lee, a landlord who owned several rental properties in the area. His connection to Dennehy would later become central to the investigation, although at the time nothing outwardly suggested the events that were about to unfold. The first indication that something was wrong began when Kevin Lee failed to appear for scheduled appointments. Friends and associates reported being unable to contact him, prompting concern that he might be missing. What investigators did not yet know was that Lee had already been killed, and that 2 more murders would soon follow. Within only a few days, what began as a routine inquiry would transform into a full-scale homicide investigation spanning multiple locations. As police began searching properties connected to the missing man, they would soon uncover evidence suggesting the case was not an isolated act of violence, but part of a far more alarming sequence of crimes. In the weeks leading up to March 2013, Joanna Dennehy's behaviour had begun to draw increasing concern from those around her. Friends and acquaintances later described a period marked by heavy alcohol consumption, unpredictable mood swings, and an apparent fascination with violent themes that many initially dismissed as dark humour. Dennehy spent much of her time moving between temporary accommodations, often staying with acquaintances for short periods before moving on. Her social circle largely consisted of individuals connected to nightlife, drinking culture, and informal housing arrangements, environments where instability was common and concerning behaviour was not always immediately questioned. During this period, she became more closely associated with Kevin Lee, a local landlord who rented out several properties in the Peterborough area. Lee had provided accommodation to various tenants over the years, and was known to interact regularly with individuals connected to the local nightlife scene. Through this connection, Dennehy gained access to properties and locations that would later become central to the investigation. Witnesses later reported that Dennehy had begun speaking more openly about violence, at times making statements that appeared deliberately provocative or intended to shock those around her. Some acquaintances described her as seeking attention through extreme remarks, while others later told investigators that they had begun to feel uneasy about the direction her behaviour appeared to be taking. Despite these warning signs, no single incident at the time clearly indicated the scale of violence that would soon occur. Much of what was later recognised as concerning behaviour appeared, in the moment, to be part of a broader pattern of chaotic lifestyle choices rather than evidence of imminent criminal acts. By early March 2013, Dennehy's movements had become increasingly unpredictable. She was frequently seen travelling between different addresses, spending nights in various locations, and maintaining contact with several individuals who would later become important witnesses during the investigation. Within this unstable environment, marked by alcohol, shifting relationships, and rising tension, the circumstances that would lead to the first killing were already beginning to take shape. Investigators would later determine that the violence did not emerge suddenly, but developed over a short period of escalating behaviour that went largely unnoticed until it was too late. In March 2013, what had appeared to be a period of instability and erratic behaviour escalated into a sequence of killings carried out over the course of several days. Investigators would later determine that the crimes were deliberate, planned in advance, and carried out with the assistance of an associate who became involved after the first murder had already taken place. The first victim was Kevin Lee, the landlord who had previously been connected to Joanna Dennehy through accommodation arrangements in the Peterborough area. Lee was killed in early March 2013. In the days that followed, efforts were made to conceal the crime, delaying the discovery that would later trigger the homicide investigation. Shortly afterward, Dennehy targeted 2 additional victims, Łukasz Slabaszewski and John Chapman, both of whom had separate connections to her social circle. Investigators later determined that the killings occurred within a short time frame, forming a sequence of events rather than isolated incidents. Following the murders, the bodies of the victims were transported to remote ditch locations outside Peterborough. The concealment attempts were not sophisticated, but they were sufficient to delay immediate detection, allowing the suspect to continue moving between locations for several days without attracting police attention. During this same period, Dennehy travelled beyond the immediate Peterborough area. In a series of attacks carried out in Herefordshire, 2 men, strangers with no prior connection to her, were seriously injured in separate incidents. Both survived, and their later statements to police became crucial in identifying the suspect's movements and establishing the broader timeline of events. The randomness of these later attacks created significant concern for investigators once the connection was made. Unlike the earlier victims, who had some level of association with Dennehy's social environment, the Herefordshire incident suggested that the violence had escalated beyond targeted individuals to include opportunistic assaults on members of the public. By the time police began linking the missing person investigation, the recovered evidence and the surviving victims' reports, it had become clear that they were dealing with a rapidly evolving multi-location case involving multiple victims over a very short period of time. The priority quickly shifted from routine investigation to urgent suspect identification and arrest. The investigation began to accelerate rapidly once police received reports that Kevin Lee had failed to attend scheduled meetings and could no longer be contacted. Initially treated as a missing person inquiry, the case shifted direction when searches of properties connected to Lee revealed signs suggesting that serious violence had occurred. As officers expanded their enquiries, evidence began to connect the disappearance to individuals who had recently been in contact with Lee, including Joanna Dennehy. Witness statements placed her in the area at key times, and investigators began assembling a timeline of movements that suggested her involvement in the events surrounding his disappearance. Search operations soon extended beyond Peterborough as police worked to identify additional locations linked to the case. During these searches, the bodies of the victims were discovered in rural ditch sites outside the city. The findings confirmed that the investigation was no longer focused on a single missing person, but had become a multi-victim homicide case. At the same time, police in other parts of the country were investigating violent attacks involving 2 male victims who had survived serious assaults carried out by an unknown suspect. As information was shared between regional forces, investigators began to recognize similarities that suggested the incidents were connected. Descriptions provided by the surviving victims, along with CCTV evidence and witness accounts, helped investigators track the suspect's movements across multiple locations. As these lines of inquiry converged, the evidence increasingly pointed toward Joanna Dennehy as the primary suspect. With the scale of the case becoming clear, police launched a coordinated effort to locate and arrest her as quickly as possible. Public safety concerns were raised due to the unpredictable nature of the attacks, and officers worked urgently to prevent further incidents while narrowing down the suspect's whereabouts. Within days, investigators had gathered sufficient evidence to move from surveillance and intelligence gathering to direct action. The search operation intensified, bringing the investigation to the critical moment where the suspect would soon be located and taken into custody, bringing an end to the series of violent events that had unfolded over the previous days. Joanna Dennehy was arrested in March 2013 following a multi-force police operation that brought an end to the urgent search for the suspect. Her arrest marked a turning point in the investigation, allowing detectives to begin reconstructing the full sequence of events that had unfolded over the previous days. During interviews, investigators worked to establish the timeline of the murders, the movements of the suspect, and the roles played by individuals who had assisted in the aftermath of the crimes. Evidence collected from multiple locations, combined with witness statements and forensic analysis, strengthened the prosecution case. As the case progressed toward trial, prosecutors outlined the charges relating to the murders of Kevin Lee, Łukasz Slaboszewski, and John Chapman, as well as the attempted murders of 2 additional victims who had survived separate attacks. The scale of the charges reflected the rapid sequence of violent events that had occurred across different locations. In court, the prosecution presented a detailed reconstruction of the timeline, supported by physical evidence, witness testimony, and investigative findings gathered from both crime scenes and associated locations. The case drew significant national attention due to the nature of the offences and the unusually short period over which the attacks had taken place. Dennehy later entered guilty pleas to the murders and attempted murders, bringing an end to the need for a lengthy contested trial. Sentencing proceedings focused on the severity of the crimes, the level of planning involved, and the ongoing risk posed to the public. In 2014, she was sentenced to a whole life order, meaning she would spend the rest of her life in prison without the possibility of release. The sentence reflected the court's assessment of the exceptional seriousness of the offences and the continuing danger she was considered to present. With the trial concluded and sentencing complete, the criminal proceedings formally came to an end. For investigators, however, the case continued to be studied as an example of a rapidly escalating series of violent crimes, raising broader questions about detection, early warning signs, and the challenges faced by authorities when offences unfold across multiple locations in a short period of time. The conclusion of the trial brought legal closure to the case, but for the families of the victims, the consequences of the crimes continued long after the sentencing. Loved ones were left to cope with the sudden loss of family members, whose lives had been taken within a matter of days, transforming what had begun as an ordinary week into a lasting personal tragedy. In the months following the case, investigators and criminal justice analysts examined the timeline in detail, focusing on how quickly the situation had escalated from isolated incidents into a multi-victim homicide investigation. The speed at which the events unfolded highlighted the difficulty authorities sometimes face when crimes occur across multiple locations in a short period of time. The investigation also drew attention to the role of witness reporting and information sharing between police forces. Statements from surviving victims, combined with rapid coordination between regional departments, played a crucial part in identifying the suspect and preventing further attacks. These elements later became key points of discussion in operational reviews of the case. Cases involving multiple victims often leave a wider impact on the communities where the crimes occurred. In Peterborough and the surrounding areas, residents were confronted with the reality that the violence had taken place within familiar neighbourhoods, reinforcing how quickly ordinary environments can become the setting for extraordinary criminal events. For criminal justice professionals, the case became a reference point for examining behavioural escalation, the importance of early reporting, and the complexities involved in managing investigations that span several jurisdictions. Each stage of the investigation, from the initial missing person report to the coordinated arrest, was later studied as part of training and review processes. While the legal proceedings closed the chapter on the criminal case itself, the long-term effects remain present in the lives of the victims' families and the communities affected. Memorials, personal tributes, and continued remembrance ensure that the individuals who lost their lives are not defined solely by the circumstances of the crimes, but by the lives they lived before them. The case of Joanna Dennehy stands as a reminder of how rapidly violent events can unfold, and how investigative coordination, witness cooperation, and swift police response play critical roles in bringing such incidents to an end. For those who continue to study criminal investigations, it remains an example of both the challenges and the responsibilities faced when confronting sudden, multi-location acts of violence.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like. It really helps the channel and tells YouTube to share it with more people. If you're interested in more true crime stories, police investigations, and the cases that changed Britain forever, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. Thanks for watching.